Hey guys, it's Jay. Welcome back to my channel, where we discuss the popular culture of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You know, the 80s was a really wonderful time. I remember growing up and kind of being just inundated with cartoons and coming home every day after school or even as early as daycare and just sitting back and watching all these wonderful animations on television. It's kind of a shame because today, the kind of animations that they have today are a little bit, well, they're not my style. Back in the day, you could have anything from Hanna-Barbera cartoons, which was mostly comedy, slapstick, and anamorphic characters, to something as real as He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which was gigantic barbarians trying to save the universe. Then there were the cartoons, which are more subtle in nature. The same kind of cartoons which would teach you lessons, but sort of try to relate to you as an everyday person, living in a neighborhood and trying just to get along with life. One of those cartoons which I remember very fondly was Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids.
Hey, 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 it's Fat Albert, and I'm gonna sing a song for you. And Bill's gonna show you.
Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids is a series which ran from 1972 all the way to 1985. Yes, it started all the way back in the 70s. It recants the adventures of Fat Albert and his gang of misfits from Philadelphia. It really was one of those really homely kind of television series. It was sort of an educational series, at the same time, just a cartoon. It tried to teach kids the values and lessons that one should learn when they're growing up. And I sort of really appreciated that. It was one of those things where it wasn't nearly as pandering as any other type of show for children. It would teach you lessons, but it would do it in a more realistic way. There would be situations where Fat Albert would get into conflicts with other children, and they would have to figure out a reasonable way of getting out of the situation. Or there would be something about drugs, or it could also be something about how to deal with trying to meet strangers, but not so much in a childlike kind of way. It was actually a little bit more mature than most television shows. And I think it had to do with the fact that it was dealing with inner city kids.
Hey, Donald, how'd your studying go?
Not so good.
Then you're going to need this, aren't you? And you know you'll never pass it. But now you can. No need to thank me. Just pay me what you owe me when the exam's over.
Fat Albert himself is not exactly the most picturesque character to make into a cartoon hero, but he's very relatable as he has his own issues. He is, as anyone can tell, overweight, but at the same time, he deals with situations in his own unique way. Fat Albert and the gang are always caught up in minor situations, usually some things to do with lying or crossing the street, or even just dealing with bullies.
Well, if we ever want to plant corn, we know where we can get the plow.
These are really relatable things that you can deal with as a kid. And the way they go about it is quite interesting. There's also these little asides by a very special character who shows up once in a while. Yes, I know, these days, he's not looked on too fondly. But back when I was growing up, he was kind of like that really cool uncle who you would always turn to for help, or someone who you could relate to, and a parental figure who sort of understood you a little bit better than your own parents. I'm talking, of course, about Bill Cosby.
Well, now, the kids were a little rough on Fat Albert, weren't they? You know, it's not helpful to make fun of anybody. I don't care if it's about eating too much or eating the wrong things, or whatever the reason for it. I mean, they got poor Fat Albert talking to himself.
Of course, Bill Cosby was a very famous comedian back in the 60s and 70s. And in the later part of his career, probably when he was getting on to the 70s and 80s, he started doing a lot of work with children's programming. One of Cosby's earliest attempts at doing children's programming was something called picture pages.
Picture pages, open up your picture pages. Time to watch Bill Cosby do a picture page with you.
In which he would draw on a interactive board. It would make small little noises, and the pen itself was actually a character. And he would try to relate to kids by drawing and educating them as they go. But arguably, Fat Albert was one of his most successful endeavors into children's programming. He would use Fat Albert as a sort of relatable character, and almost as if he was part of the show itself. Every now and then, the show would break, and we would cut over to Bill Cosby, and he would give us some life lessons, or explain to us exactly what might be happening and what Fat Albert might be thinking. It's very interesting because it gave us a little bit of a live-action, relatable character. As I said, kind of like that really cool uncle who you talk to instead of your parents. And he would actually try to relate to the kids as a fatherly figure, parental figure, or someone who, again, you can just relate to like a cool uncle. This was very interesting as a child. I remember thinking to myself, I can actually relate to this guy. He's older than me, he has a lot more knowledge, and the situations that Fat Albert found himself in were easily digested through Bill Cosby.
You know, I think that Fat Albert's diet is even getting to me. I'd rather have this. No question about it. Your body knows no substitute for good fresh fruit. It's one of the best ways to make sure you get enough vitamins. But there's still one body who still hasn't gotten the message.
This being more of a, less of a PSA type of situation, but more of an educational show. It really was one of those difficult things where entertainment and education had to come hand in hand. And I think that the Fat Albert show really did give that kind of special way of doing things where you could still be entertained as a child looking at these stories that Fat Albert and his gang are getting into, and at the same time you could still get some sort of moral lesson out of it. It really was one of those quirky little 80s TV shows where every single time at the end of the episode, Fat Albert and his gang would get on their makeshift instruments in the junkyard and start playing a song and really just recanting what it is that they learned that day. It really was quite unique.
And don't go telling a lie. But it's kind of like a snowball rolling down the hill. It just keeps getting bigger.
One of the episodes I remember very fondly was titled Justice, As Good as Ever. It involved Rudy, one of the gang, who had just picked up a brand new bicycle, in which they wanted to use to actually enter a big race. Everything seems to be going great for the gang, until Rudy's neighbor, Bobby Hansen, runs over the bicycle with his car, destroying it. Of course, Rudy is upset and asks Bobby to pay for the damages. Bobby refuses, and even threatens Rudy by saying that his dad's a lawyer and he can't do anything about it. It's a typical situation where someone with more influence and power is able to get away with whatever they want. In the end, Rudy and the kids find out that they're able to go to small claims court, which allows for claims under $2,000 at the time. It's a very interesting scene where Bobby is shaking in his knees, and you see that he's looking at his dad for help, but his father can't do anything. It's just him, Rudy, and the judge. And in the end, Bobby has to fork up the money and fess up to what he's done. A wonderful lesson learned, and another one of those restoring faith in humanity moments where we learn that justice is served. As lighthearted as the show was, it also dealt with some very serious themes. In an episode titled Gang Wars, Fat Albert tries to help his friend Fernando to keep out of trouble and tries to help him to avoid joining his brother Tito's gang. in the end, Fernando is killed by a gunshot. It's a very somber and deadly reminder of what can actually happen when real life hits kids. It's the only episode in the series where a character actually dies on screen. The actual scene itself is quite disturbing. We can see Tito standing in an empty alleyway and Fernando running up towards him to try and save his brother, because what he sees in the back is this looming shadow of a gun. If it wasn't for Fernando, Tito would be killed. The moral lesson, though, is that Fat Albert runs to Tito and tells him that revenge is not the way, and that if he had stayed out of this gang and done the right thing, Fernando would still be alive.
Don't you understand? You've seen what happens when fight and revenge is all you think of. You've seen what happened to Fernando. When does it stop, man? Fernando died trying to save you, and it's all gonna be for nothing, because you're gonna end up dead too.
But why did they do it? Why did they kill my brother? Why didn't they shoot me instead?
This was one of the more serious topics covered by the show, and Fat Albert wouldn't shy away from issues which affected young people, even today. Though they would never go back to the narrative as serious as Fernando's death, and instead using common sense and quick thinking to deal with topics like racism, showing that violence is never the answer.
Look, Tubby, run along before you get hurt.
The other really funny thing about Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, and one of my favorite sections whenever it did come around, was the episodes of the Brown Hornet. I always remember being very, very excited whenever I would see the kids running into the clubhouse in the junkyard, clamoring all together on one couch, this gigantic clubhouse, and they're all just sitting on this tiny little couch, trying to watch this tiny little television screen for an episode of the Brown Hornet. The Brown Hornet was sort of a superhero character who was obviously patented over Bill Cosby, and he would solve a lot of the problems that were happening in the show as well. Not so much in tandem, but the episode usually had something which was relatable to what the kids were going to. And it was just a funny way of showing that superheroes might have little answers for you if you listen to what they're trying to say.
Too much of anything can hurt you, and you have had enough sweets for today, Blue Car. And now it is off to the health farm for you, Prince Blue Car, to get you off the junk food.
I want to thank you, Brown Hornet, for saving the prince.
I've learned a good lesson. I'll never eat junk food again.
But the superior nature and the cartoonish aspect of the Brown Hornet was just one of those things which was really enjoyable for the show. It was just like having this, again, larger-than-life character trying to teach you lessons and saving the universe at the same time. Great stuff.
Tune in next week for another exciting episode of The Brown Hornet!
Fat Albert remains to this day as one of my favorite cartoons and memories of the 1970s and 80s. I really fondly remember it as I was a young kid, not really knowing about the world, and watching these characters who were in many ways in my situation as well. I grew up in a very small neighborhood, wasn't really affluent or anything like that, and we dealt with many of the problems that Fat Albert and his gang would go through as well. And I remember that the lessons that they taught me were very important, and I still live with a lot of them today. It's unfortunate that the legacy of Bill Cosby has come so, well, far down as it has in the last few years. But the work that he did in children's programming can't be denied. I really did appreciate him being that really cool uncle that I could always go to if I couldn't talk to my parents. And that's something that I'll always take with me. Well guys, that'll about do it for my look back at Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. It really was one of those fun little cartoons which I remember fondly, and I hope you guys will be able to check it out. You might be able to find it somewhere. I'm not sure it's on DVD anymore, but you definitely can find some episodes on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, guys, please give me a like. It really helps me out. If you have any comments and suggestions on anime, cartoons, toys, collectibles, or anything else you'd like me to review, please leave that in the comment section below. And consider subscribing, as it helps YouTube realize that my channel is growing and that you guys appreciate my work. Well guys, as always, thank you very much for watching. Keep proud. Check out some of the other episodes I've done. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter.